If you're just starting your artist journey, I have some great recommendations for you guys today.
Hey art nerds, so I received the request to talk about some of the books and resources that I recommend. And while I do sprinkle these throughout various series and various videos, I figured it would be kind of nice to do a 2024 what I recommend for people who are just getting started. I want to give some massive caveats here. We're mostly going to be talking about books. In general, if you're just getting started, I would really recommend that you draw as much as possible, you sketch as much as possible, both from life and from what interests you. You do style studies of artists who you look up to, and find yourself a group of artists that you resonate with, who you like the way they think, and who you can learn from. Being the worst artist in the room is not a bad thing. It puts you in a position to learn. So the way I think most people are going to learn and grow the most is by putting themselves in social situations, ideally in person, where you can get feedback and you can learn tips and tricks from other artists. I have here a collection of some of the books that I recommend, not all because I could not find all of them, or some of them I've only read in a digital format. And because I don't have a great memory, I have a written up list. This benefits you guys though, because I'm going to put this down in the description below for you guys. I'm also going to have links where you can order or find these things, because not all of these things are books that you can purchase. Some of them are PDFs that are out of print. I would also recommend that you check and see if your library has these books before you purchase anything, unless you're like me and you like to mark up your books, you like to write in your books, you like to use Post-it notes all over your books, or you think this is going to be a resource that you're going to turn to time and time again. Or you fill out a library request form and see if your library can get a hold of these books. I'm not trying to sell you guys anything, but if you do use my Amazon links, I do see a little bit of money off of that. So I have talked about how I kind of learned and grew as an artist in my artist chat about why I don't like the term self-taught artist. So I'm gonna link that for you guys. I'm not gonna super get into it. Suffice to say, I have a combination of formal education and also education acquired from the internet and from books and from other artists. So I think I probably have a lot in common with many of you guys. So to begin with, the request to come up with a list of things that I recommend for a beginner is kind of a generalized list. So I decided to do it the way I wanted to do it, rather than, trying to read people's minds or making this huge exhaustive list that can, answer to every contingency. So I am mostly going to be talking today to people who want to become comic artists, who are interested in figurative art, or who want to become illustrators. There's going to be some talk about watercolor, but I'm not going to get super deep into that because I'm still reading a bunch of watercolor books and I'm still trying to figure out which watercolor books are my favorite watercolor books. I am not going to post images on the screen or anything like this because I'm going to talk about these books in a very general manner. So to begin with, if you're interested in drawing people, I would really recommend you check out the Glenn Vilppu drawing manual. It's been in and out of print. It can be kind of hard to find. So he's done some videos with the channel Proko, Proko. I would also recommend them if you're interested in learning how to draw people. I have a very cartoony art style, and the way he teaches figure drawing is applicable both for very realistic figure studies and portraiture, as well as more stylized art. So I think he presents a really helpful framework on breaking down and understanding not only the human figure, but a lot of what he talks about can be applied to animals as well. Constructive drawing as a concept, as a whole, cannot recommend it enough. 10 out of 10. It is the method that I teach. It's the methods that I use. And it is a way of visualizing the world in simplified forms that can allow you to draw pretty much anything that you can think of. So that is a really great basis to start, is studying constructive drawing, constructive anatomy. I also recommend, with some caveats, Andrew Loomis. Figure drawing, for all it's worth, is a somewhat dated reference, but there's still a lot of good information there, especially about the especially about the skeletal structure. There we go. That's what I want. Stick figuring the human form, and there's some information on proportions that can be helpful. It's a your mileage may vary sort of thing. And I would also recommend Fun with a Pencil and Successful Drawing, particularly if you're interested in composition. I don't remember if it's Fun with a Pencil or Successful Drawing, but there's an entire chapter on different compositions that if you're interested in illustration and comic work, I think those will be really helpful. Another thing I really need to point out is if you are learning from books, learn with your sketchbook in your hand. So take notes on what you're reading, copy the exercises into your sketchbook, and then pick a real world or online example and utilize the techniques covered to redraw that. And that's going to help you internalize it a lot better. As I mentioned earlier, I would also recommend the YouTube channel Proco. They cover the human body and constructive drawing in great detail, maybe more detail than you need, but I can't determine that for you. I would also recommend the Famous Artist course and the Famous Artist Cartoonist course. Those were ongoing through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I believe it was like a mail correspondence course, and they would send out these like pamphlets, and those pamphlets are hugely helpful. You can find them as PDFs, and they are just such wonderful little nuggets of information. I will link that down in the description below for you guys. I know a lot of you guys have told me that you don't learn well from video instruction. So we have got books, we've got PDFs, we have got written with illustrations, all kinds of things like that for you guys today. But I am going to recommend some channels as well. I would also recommend Scott McCloud if you are interested in comics. Did not grab any Scott McCloud, that's fine. Understanding Comics is generally considered a seminal work for understanding the thought process that goes into making comics, understanding comics, and creating comics that other people can understand. I highly recommend them. Reinventing Comics is, some would argue, it's a look into the future. He was prophetic about some things, kind of missed the mark on others, and Mastering Comics is kind of like the sweet spot in between those two books. So I would recommend all three of them. Drawing Words and Writing Pictures by Jessica Abel and Matt Madden. This is basically comics art school in a book form. It is different projects that you can do to kind of try out different comic techniques, to learn different comic methods, and basically learn at your own pace rather than taking a class. So if you don't have access to sequential art classes through your college, through your library, through a graduate program, what have you, this book, plus some friends who are also interested in the topic, can kind of help you learn the ins and outs. To follow up with it, Mastering Comics, More of the Same, Even Better. So these two books, you can kind of teach yourself the basics of sequential art at your own pace. There is also Drawn to Life, and that is a 2-volume series. I only have volume 2 in front of me. It is by it's a collection of Walt Stanfield's lectures that he gave when he was teaching artists at Disney a variety of topics. You know how I talked about Glenn Vilppu? Glenn Vilppu also taught Disney animators. So Walt Stanfield and Glenn Vilppu, if you like comics, if you like an expressive illustration-y style, if you like a cartoony art style, those are going to be a great place to look. And Drawn to Life is a series that I read and reread over the years, and there's always so much to learn. There is also Grizz and Norm's Tuesday Tips. So those are just delightful little tutorials. If you frequent Pinterest, you've probably seen them on Pinterest. They're very popular over there. They're also on Tumblr, and they also sell the compiled Tuesday Tips in a volume 1 and a volume 2. I happen to have both. They break down cartooning, comic craft, and illustration in a very accessible way. I highly recommend them. There is also the series How to Think When You Draw. I have the first 4 of these books. I only grabbed the first one. They are a collection of drawing and thinking tutorials. I actually need to rework my way through these books. I believe they're on like 6 or 7 books now. They have a Kickstarter every couple of years for another one. And it's just kind of a collection of tips and hints. So this is not a standalone how to draw book. This is you already are learning how to draw. You're learning how to draw from other sources. This is going to take your art to the next higher level. And I need to work through the grizz and norms, and I need to work through these because I need to take my work to the next level. So when it comes, we've talked a lot about books for comics, cartooning, that sort of thing, you know, where my heart is. I also spent a lot of time reading, back in the day, animation blogs, comic blogs. Unfortunately, blogs are not as accessible, not as updated. So a lot of how I, augmented my education, that's not really so available anymore. That said, YouTube and TikTok were not such a thing when I was in grad school. So we have different resources now. And if I have missed a favorite resource of yours that you think I really should mention, let me know in the comments. Aaron Blaze does a lot of animation tutorials and walkthroughs over on his YouTube channel. So you may find the art of Aaron Blaze to be really helpful. A friend of mine, Jersey Droids, does a podcast, and he's also done some YouTube videos, and he's also done some streams. He is a comics and art teacher, and he's just such a wonderful, warm, and friendly person. I think sitting in and watching some of his streams might be really inspiring and educational for you, particularly if you're interested in comics. And I share my own comic art and process here on this channel and on Patreon and on social media as well. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but following artists who you admire, following artists whose work you like, or following artists who you just like resonate with on a level and seeing what they post and watching their process, that can be extremely, extremely educational for you as well. So I have one watercolor book that I do want to talk about. I was really impressed with Jeannie Dixon's Hello Watercolor. I felt like she did a really good job talking about this topic in a way that both beginner and intermediate watercolor artists and illustrators can understand. So if you're looking for one watercolor book, and I haven't finished reading through my hoard of watercolor books, this is not like the definitive, it's just one that I was impressed with and can recommend. I did really enjoy Hello Watercolor, and I think you guys might as well. For some online resources, handprint.com is a phenomenal watercolor resource. If you are interested in how paints work and why paints work and what pigments do what and the different types of pigments, handprint.com is a really, really helpful resource. It's how I learned a lot about watercolor on my own. And it's a resource that I turn to time and time again. I also have some feelings about Wet Canvas. It's a forum. It can be great, but also take it with a grain of salt. If you like cartoony art and illustration-y art, they don't. So just let that go. Don't be offended by them. And some of the paints that work for them may not work for you, but it is an additional reference, an additional resource where lots of different artists are sharing their opinions and their viewpoints, and it can be very educational to just read through and kind of see how other artists think. I would also recommend not just talking about books, but I would recommend that you take classes, like in-person classes, ideally, and make friends in those classes. You can continue to hit each other up for advice and critique as time progresses, particularly if you maintain these friendships. Form social groups and try to get your friends into art so that you guys can take classes together, because having that structure, that art structure, that art mindset, that group of artists who you hang out with and you show each other your work and you go to gallery openings or you go to see animated movies together, that can be such a huge part of your growth. When I had that friend group that I could go do those things with, I improved so much as an artist, and I haven't really had that kind of a friend group in a long time, and I really felt my work stagnate because of it. So if you can do that, if you can form that kind of a group, or if you're already part of that kind of a group, it can be really beneficial to your growth as an artist. So I pulled out a bunch of books from my own library that I didn't write down. So I'm gonna kind of go back into that. I really like David Chelsea's books on perspective. You maybe not every exercise, don't treat it as like a step 1, step 2, step 3 exercise book. Rather, as you're drawing comics and coming across different types of perspective that you would like to use to make your art stronger, reference his books and see how he handles it. These are a great learn by example. They're very accessible, they're very witty, they're fun and easygoing. Some of the perspectives that they present are quite challenging, but they are just an enjoyable read. I also really recommend Stephen McCraney's Brick by Brick. This isn't so much a how-to as it is a graphic novel about being an artist and making art and overcoming self-doubt. And there are a lot of how-to books that will pump you up and encourage you and kind of fill your head with fluff. Books like this are so important because they're hopeful while honest. They are grounding while looking to the future. So if you can get your hands on Brick by Brick, and there's also a subsequent workbook, I really recommend them. I think they are such a wonderful antidote to some of the fluff that gets put into the air. The Will Eisner Library has some really helpful resources if you're a comic person, with lots of Will Eisner's art and thought process and lots of demonstrations. There's several different of these books, so just kind of pick topics that are helpful for you. The Mangaka Startup Guide, How to Pen and Ink, if you like manga art. Okay, first of all, Japanese art books and Japanese how to draw books they're so good. Just start going to McKay's and looking for Japanese art books. They're so good. I cannot recommend favorites because I have so many of them. I do like the ones that are written in English though. Pen and Ink is great. It has techniques from Yasuhiro Natao, Oh Great, and Satoshi Shiki. So, very acclaimed. I'm looking and they have these like little gag comics and I'm like, oh, I can't. That's not what I can show you guys. Anyway, for comic people, for illustration people, for people who like to work with traditional media, this could be a really good one. I recommend Drawing Comics Lab if you are a younger artist or if you want to teach comics in an accessible way to younger artists. This could be a good classroom resource. I have two more. I have a lot of the David Chelsea books. I actually really like them, even though I'm really bad at perspective. The 5 C's of Cinematography is a really helpful resource for comic artists because comics are very similar to film. We work from scripts. We're working with kind of staged panels or sequences. We're telling stories in a sequence. There's various types of storytelling that we need to understand to successfully draw comics. So if you can draw, but you're having trouble with the knack of comics, not only reading comics, you should read comics, but the 5 C's of Cinematography is a really helpful and generally recommended resource. Now, it's been years since I've been in comics art school, so there may be a new Grail book that I'm just not aware of. So I'm kind of going by what I know. So we talked about Glenn Vilppu, but when I was at SCAD and I was taking constructive human anatomy, we were instructed to buy Elliot Goldfinger's Human Anatomy for Artists. Now, I still ended up mostly leaning on Uncle Vilppu and Uncle Loomis for help, but this was one of the texts that they recommended to us, so I grabbed it to present it to you guys. Different people learn in different ways. You may find this to be a helpful resource. On that note, you may find Bern Hogarth to be a helpful resource. There is also Jack Ham's, and I forget the name of the book. I am so sorry. I will bring it up over here. I've talked about it on the channel many times. That book is great. The problem is a lot of the how to make comic books were drawn in the 40s and the 50s by Golden Age, I want to say. I'm a comics fan, but I hate superheroes, so, by Golden Age comic artists. So some of the information can feel a little dated. Just keep in mind you may have to change things to meet modern aesthetics. That the techniques they're showing you are great. Just change the eye shape a little bit. Just change the shoulder width a little bit. Just change the waist a little bit of tweaks here and there. Michael D. Mattesi's Force books can be a really helpful resource for taking what you learned from Glenn Vilppu and kind of drawing it more dynamically, learning how to morph it. He has several of these books out. And that covers kind of briefly the books, the reading of my recommended reading. So I would recommend that if you have this available, that you take classes. Request if not offered. Your local library, you can request them at your local library, community college classes, local art guilds, local art stores. If you are in the area, you can take Art of the Carolinas, that's put on by Jerry's Artorama, I believe, or you can go to Hands-On Creativity, that's put on by Plaza, and they have all these different workshops, and all of these different vendors come in and teach you how to use the materials and do demos, and it's free. So not only do you get your hands on these materials, so you can actually see why professional grade paints handle differently from student grade paints, and cotton rag paper handles differently from cellulose paper without spending a lot of money on it, but you can ask questions and you can get direct guidance. I also recommend that you guys read store blogs. Seriously. I learned to paint from friends and from reading Blick's blog and watching all of their watercolor tutorials. Jackson's has a YouTube channel and a TikTok, and I watch their TikTok because they talk about pigments all the time. Jerry's Artorama has a YouTube channel, and Might Not Jerry demonstrates various properties of different paints and different products that they have. Watching these kind of supplemental materials can really help you learn how to use the materials, as well as what materials might be a good fit for you. Just in general, follow artists you like and artists you don't always gel with on social media, because many of us will post our process, we'll post things we're thinking about, books we've been reading, other channels we've been watching. We'll share tips and resources that we've found. Blue Sky Threads and TikTok are all great places to find that kind of tidbit art instruction that can offer tips that are sometimes honestly quite life-changing. I remember Temple of the Seven Golden Camels shared a lot of just construction tips and composition tips that really made a big difference in my life. And that blog is still up. It's changed format over the years. I remember reading it in grad school and just finding it such a tremendous wealth of information. You're going to have to start taking risks, checking out random art books from the library, following artists whose art you like but you don't really know, or artists who share a lot of useful information. Sit in during artist live streams and feel free to ask real questions, because many of us love talking about this stuff, but we don't know where to start talking and we're not sure what our audience is interested in. Now, these didn't work for me, but they're worth mentioning. Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain is this book that, like, when people want to learn how to draw, that book used to get recommended a lot. And it didn't work for me because I have always thought the way she describes thinking. This was not like a paradigm shift for me. It's just the ADHD brain already thinks the way that she describes. So you might want to check it out. It might be useful for you. Or you may find that she's already talking about things like you already see the world that way. It's not going to be that life-changing. James Gurney, he's the guy who did the Dinotopia art. Beautiful, beautiful art. He has a book called Color and Light, and I own that book and I have not read it yet. And everybody says it is great. I haven't read it yet, so I don't know, but his YouTube channel is great. He does watercolor, he does wash, he talks about light. His channel is well worth the recommendation. Now, there's some additional resources that I'd like to recommend. This isn't all inclusive, but Senshi Stock / Adorka Stock, this is clothed figure drawing. So when I say clothed, I mean they're wearing leotards. So it can be useful if you're a teacher and you're teaching like high school artists, or if you're just not looking to draw super realistic human anatomy. That said, if there are live figure drawing sketches, if there are sip-and sketches or drink and draws in your local area, if there's Dr. Sketchies, these are all live figure drawing, costume, prop drawing events that you can register and go to. I highly recommend those. When I lived in New Orleans the first time, I used to go to drink and draws held in the area. These were always at bars. They were always at tiny bars, and we were basically on top of the nude models, which, so you really want some distance so you can see what you're drawing. Fortunately, I was also taking figure drawing classes at UNL, and we also would have live figure drawing sessions that were done professionally where you have good distance from the model. But frankly, if you want to draw from life, You don't have to go to those kind of sessions. You can set up a still life in your own house. You can go to the zoo and draw the animals there. You can go to the botanical garden and sketch people. Everywhere you are is a drawing opportunity. And anytime you're bored and you might pull out your phone, you could pull out a sketchbook. And I'm a fine one to talk. I used to be really good about that, and now I'm really terrible about it. And I don't pull out my sketchbook nearly enough. But that is still a recommendation that I would give to someone who's looking to start their artistic journey. Now, I have talked a lot about wanting to be more inclusive in the kind of people that I draw. So there's a site called Fat Photo Reference, which is a wonderful resource for drawing more diverse body types. You do, I believe, have to request access. They just want to make sure you're not a gross creep who's going to be a gross creep, and that you just want to draw people of different body sizes in a respectful way. Like, there is nothing wrong with that. But they are a great resource, and it is an artist who runs it. So you literally just need to be like, I just want to practice drawing different bodies because I think different bodies deserve representation. And it's probably that simple. I would really encourage you to find yourself a community of fellow artists. If you need encouragement or advice, I have an art-centric Discord server, The Paint Box. You are welcome. We have rules about, like, you can't just spam your art. You have to talk about the art above it. We have boards specifically for feedback and critique. We have rules to make sure that everything goes smoothly. It is a fairly quiet and friendly little community. If you have your own Discord server of artists that you already belong to, that works fine too. You can also try Facebook art improvement groups. I don't have any that I particularly recommend. I have friends who will talk about groups that they like. I don't super love Facebook, so I'm like, oh. But that is an option, and you can check there. You can check Instagram. You can check DeviantArt. Used to be you could check ArtStation, but start looking at the forums and looking at different groups of sites that you might already frequent. So my own favorite resources that I created to help you guys out, I have a watercolor basics series. It is both on my blog as well as here on the channel. So if you like written, I got you. If you like video, I got you. I have an intro to comic craft series. That's another one that is also on the blog and on YouTube. I have a how to draw anything class series here on YouTube. It's free. It's like 4 classes. It's all about construction and volumetric drawing and learning how to apply those principles to draw anything that you might want to learn how to draw. I have a making comics and zines class list. So it's a set of classes where I talk about different topics for comics, for drawing, and for zine making. I have a watercolor crash course here on the channel. It's like 7 videos that walk you through 7 different aspects of watercolor, from the supplies to the paper to different techniques to pulling it all together. I have my start to finish tutorials, which are drawing tutorials, inking tutorials, and then watercolor tutorials. And I have my how to draw and paint people playlist. So I have a lot of resources here on the channel that are very beginner friendly and very beginner centric. As I've told you guys before, I teach in the regular world as well as online. And while I have taught adults in the regular world, I find that I like teaching teenagers the best. So I try to keep my tutorials very friendly, very accessible, and just very quick to pick things up. So I hope you guys will check them out. So I will have all of this down in the description below for you guys if you prefer to read as you watch, and I'll have links when available for the things that I mentioned. I may sprinkle in some additional resources as well. I'm recording this after teaching a class, so I'm a little bit tired, but my outfit is super duper cute, and I just could not let that go to waste. So hopefully you found these recommendations to be helpful, useful, and informative. If you have your own recommendations that you'd like to share, please do share them down in the comments. It helps me, it helps other artists. You might turn somebody on to their next favorite book. And as I work on the Easily Influenced series and I continue to read different artists' books, hopefully I'll be able to share some more recommended reading for you guys, or some more recommended viewing, or some more resources, because I love finding new resources and I love being able to share that with you guys, because I firmly believe that if more people pick up art, more people learn to love art, more people make it for themselves, that we will live in a better world and there will be more room and more respect for artists. So hopefully this was helpful in making art accessible for you guys and for making art a habit. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye!